Welcome, everyone, to our January community class. This community class is going to focus on key dates, workflow targets, and reminders. So I will be your presenter today. My name is Melissa Brooks, and I'm the team lead for the CSAs. All the other CSAs are on the line today as well, and we'll be able to answer questions towards the end of the session if you should have any. If you have those questions during the session, please feel free to type them into the Q&A section, and that way everyone that's a panelist can see it and can start working on providing you that answer. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. On our agenda today, first we're going to look at adding and changing the key dates and looking at what key dates are in the system. Move on to workflow targets and the value they can provide to you. Take a look at short-term reminders and how to configure those reminders that's most appropriate. And at that point, we're going to jump into an instance of Lawtrac and go through a short demo of how to, from the user perspective, see how those things function, and then also from an admin perspective on how to configure those items. And then lastly, we'll look at long-term reminders. And some of you may know long-term reminders as the contracts notification module. And then we'll follow up with tips and tricks. So our demo today is going to be in the 4.0 environment. When I took a look at the attendee list yesterday, most everyone on that list was currently in the 4.0 system, so I thought it was most appropriate to do the demo in the 4.0 environment. If you're currently on a 3X version of Lawtrac and would like a little bit more direction of 3.7 or 3.6 after the webinar, feel free to reach out directly to your CSA and they can talk to you a little bit more about the 3X specific navigation. So first we'll start with key dates. So key dates are important to capture value of important dates on each matter, and they're defined at the matter type level. So per category, or type 1 as some refer to it, you can define different key dates for each of those. The ones we're going to focus on today are these 10 date fields because those themselves can be used to define workflow targets. So when you're in Lawtrac itself, the key dates are located on this left-hand side here. And as a user, you can edit these key dates by selecting the date itself, the date picker, adding the date, and then saving. So it's just a simple edit to the key date to be able to add that. Short-term reminders are valuable and helpful items in Lawtrac that can help you remind your users to complete certain activities, usually based off these key dates. You'll notice that many of these dates have these timers or bells next to them, and that notes that these particular items do have reminders attached to them. So reminders work to send emails to in-house legal staff that's assigned to the matter, key personnel that's assigned to the matter, and there's also the ability to add optional recipients, and we'll go through what that looks like a little bit later. Reminders can also be configured on checklist questions, and they can also be attached to the workflow target dates. You can point out the reminders there. So if I wanted to add a short-term reminder at this point, you would select the date. I'm going to go ahead and add a date in here as well. I'm going to set the reminder to be 3 days prior to the 27th. And save that. You can see as I enter the date, there's also a reminder icon here as well. When you're in a matter in Lawtrac, you'll note that the short-term reminders is where you'll find a list of all of the reminders on this particular matter. Over here, Lawtrac will list every single event on this matter, and if there is a reminder attached to it, you'll see when the reminder is targeted to be sent, and how many days before the particular event date it will be sent. On this page, you will also see the required recipients list. So this list will consist of the in-house legal staff and the key personnel that are assigned to this particular matter. Note that all in-house legal staff and key personnel will automatically receive these reminders. And in the case of the key personnel, as long as they have an email address on their contact, they'll receive reminders. Here, there's also the optional recipients list that I referred to earlier. The optional recipients list is a list of in-house legal department members that perhaps aren't necessarily assigned to this matter, but you'd select them to receive reminders. And so you could add people to the matter to receive these reminders, and this is done easily through this drop down here. So I'm going to add Suzanne to receive a reminder. And you can see here that she shows up in this optional recipients list. I'm going to show you guys quickly what it would look like on the legal team page when you add optional recipients. So here you can see the in-house legal staff that is assigned to the matter that's receiving these reminders. And then if you add those optional recipients, they'll be added here with the role of reminder on the matter. Now that we've gone through what key dates are and how to set up reminders on those key dates, we're going to look at workflow targets. Workflow targets, I think, are a very underutilized section and software item within Lawtrac. When used right and thoughtfully, these can really streamline standard processes and direct users to complete specified business process. So these are found under the calendar and events section, and what they do is automatically or manually, we'll talk about how the differences in those later, can define an event on the calendar based on another one of your key dates. So for instance, we have 3 of these targets here defined, and with a review outcome, so that is a target we've defined, which after 5 days after the date is closed, a date here will be automatically generated to be 5 days after that date closed. So I'm going to take you guys into a matter view here and show you a couple more. The workflow targets are listed under the short-term reminders, and here we'll also add another date. So this is going to be manually adding, and as we jump into the instance later, I'll clarify a little bit more about the difference between manual and automatic. But if I wanted to add the key date that was defined 3 days after a court date, it would automatically get added to the calendar. So now at this point, I'm going to jump into Lawtrac, and we're going to create a matter and go through the process of adding key dates, setting up reminders, as well as looking at those workflow targets. So I'm going to add a matter type of contract. And while I'm adding this matter, since we're really focusing on the key dates and reminders functionality, that's what we'll add into the system and this matter as well. So I'm going to quickly fill in all these dates so we have all of this data to play with later. make sure we have a primary on the matter myself. So we're adding the record, and we'll view this record. So we just added this matter with a number of the key dates filled in, with the legal team defined as myself as the primary. The first thing I'd like to do is add some reminders to some of these dates. So notice that on reminders, it's always a certain number of days before the event. And here on our short-term reminders page, right now, since I am the only person assigned to this matter, I'm the only person on this required list to receive these update notifications. And then here you can see all the reminders that I just set, the 9 days and the 3 days before these particular key dates. And I'm also going to add someone else to this legal team so we can see pop up here as well. And let's look at key personnel now. I'm going to add an active key person. So let's add, so we'll talk about what these mean a little bit later in the long-term reminder section. You notice that Callista has an email address. I'm going to add another key personnel that doesn't have an email address, because earlier I mentioned that as long as the person has an email address, they'll get reminders. So I'm going to show you the difference. See, this person does not. And when I go over to short-term reminders, notice that only Callista shows up here because she has an email address defined, but the other assignee did not. Here in optional recipients, we'll add an optional person and then compare again to our legal team and see that this person was added with the role of reminder. Now that we've looked at short-term reminders, let's look at our workflow targets that are defined on this. As we were adding this key date, Lawtrac automatically calculated a number of these dates based on the target that we defined on our matter type. So we have an action 1 day after our archive on key date, and that is February 1st. Also, we also have, so that one was automatically added. There was a manual configuration, or a manual defined configuration workflow target to add a review document task 4 days after the agreement date. So that key date that we filled in, once we add that to the calendar, it automatically calculates those 4 days after the agreement date that we filled in. So we can see here how defining more of these targets and defining more items around business process to add into Lawtrac can help you reinforce with your users some of those standard processes that they need to follow. So now that we've seen this from the user perspective, I'd like to show you guys how to set these things up. So as an admin, you can go into your application administration and then go into matter maintenance. And then as these items are configured per category or type 1, what you'll want to do is go into your legal hierarchy maintenance. So earlier we were on a contract matter. So we're going to go into the contract matters and look at all of the key dates that were defined and change a few of those labels. So here under captions, you scroll down to the bottom, you see all of our date fields. And these are the date fields that we filled in when we just created that matter. I'm going to change the label on one of these so you can see the changes in the system. Just a word of caution, if you're going through reconfiguring these items in your own environment, make sure that before you make any changes, you consider the type of data that may or may not already be in that field. And if you have any questions about best practices and reconfiguring and changing labels on fields, please feel free to reach out to your CSA. We can have a conversation with you about what you're trying to accomplish and how best to do it. You can see here with the Lawtrac 4.0, it's automatically saving, and note that with the green dot. So here are the key dates to change. That's a super simple configuration that's available within Lawtrac. And now that we've looked at configuring key dates, let's look at configuring the workflow targets. So I've been mentioning manual and automatic several times, and really what I'm referring to are these dots here. So with a manual workflow target, what I'm really trying to say is that the workflow target is there and it's defined, but it won't automatically add it to your calendar. So these are good for workflow targets that may not necessarily apply to every single matter of that type. So if it doesn't really apply to every single subcategory of contract, you can have it available for your user to use and add to the calendar if they'd like, but it's not necessarily added automatically. And in the same way, if there's an action that's going to be required on every single contract type matter, you can automatically make sure those are added to the system. So I'm going to just add a simple workflow target here, just to test one for you guys. And a difference to remember between reminders and workflow targets is that reminders remind you before an event, and workflow targets create an event based on a key date, so it's after that key date. Save that, and right now it is set as the manual addition. Okay. So I'm going to take a quick pause right here and let you guys add any questions that you may have about key dates, short-term reminders, and workflow targets. And then we'll go into the long-term reminders and what those are and how they can help you within Lawtrac. Okay, I do see some questions coming in, and we can revisit those a little bit towards the end. And we're going to look at some of the short-term or the long-term reminders right now. So long-term reminders, some of you may be familiar with them as the contract notification module. So the value with long-term reminders is that It's a system that can help you easily identify contracts reaching renewal or contracts outside the term date, or a lot of times they're used as proactive measures to inform users that there are events on the matter that might have financial implications. So I'll talk about what it is first, and then I'm going to present a business use case scenario to you to help make it a little bit more relatable. So what the long-term reminder does is sends periodic emails to users based on a defined characteristic within the matter, the key date, and also the status of the matter. So the module does have to be turned on by the Lawtrac administrator. So if you don't see long-term reminders within your matters today, there's a good chance the module is not turned on. You can configure the matters, configure which matters are included in this notification system based on their status. And the key dates that are, specifically that are included, will be configured on the matter. And then, so email reminders are sent before and after the key date should it fit the criteria that's defined. So let's put this into a business case so it's more easily relatable. So for instance, as a business managing numerous contracts, business users need an easier way to be reminded that their active contracts are reaching the end of their term. They also need a way to be notified if the active contract is past the term date. So talking to the business users, what they really would like to know is, like, each month have a list of contracts that may fit this classification. So they don't necessarily want every day an email about this, but a compiled email noting everything that could be included with this, what they really want. And then they also wanted to be notified of who the primary legal department contact is on that particular matter, so if they should have any questions, they'll be able to reach out to them and know exactly who to reach out to for those questions. So I have a few of the parameters defined here. So the status for checking on the matters is to make sure it's a contract active status. We're looking at, in particular, the term dates on that matter, that contract, to understand if it's expired or past term or reaching the term end date. And we'd like to be notified monthly. So the repeat cycle on that is a monthly notification. And the target audience in this case is the key personnel user on the matter. And the contact info that needs to be included in this notification is the primary legal department user on the active contract. So here is an example of something that a user could receive. So what we have here, we have some directions about what this email is. We have one contract that is passed within the past 60 days has gone out of term, and within the next 120 days, 2 will be reaching their term end date. Over here, we have a list of others that were notified of this particular contract, and then a point person within the legal department to contact should you have any questions. So what I'm going to do is jump into Lawtrac, and we're going to start with how an admin should approach configuring this long-term reminder scenario, and also how it looks on the matter. So as I mentioned earlier, the long-term notifications have to be turned on by an admin. So if you don't have that currently turned on, you would go into miscellaneous settings under your application administration and select your notifications. And this toggle here will turn on and off that long-term reminder section. Here are also a lot of the items that were defined in that email. I'm going to expand these and just let you guys be able to read them as we talk through them. So up here at the top, we have our days to look back and our days to look forward. So as in our email example, it showed us contracts that went out of term date within the past 60 days. So we configure that here just look at contract term dates in the past 60 days, and in the same way we configured it to look forward 120 days. In this repeat cycle, there are several configurable options here, and since the business users want a notification each month, we went ahead and chose monthly. Here we'll also see that the next one is scheduled for tomorrow. As we move down the screen, we'll have a few more options. Note that there is a lot of direction on the right-hand side on what these options mean and what they entail. So if you have any questions, make sure you read this side over here to see if it answers your question. As we scroll down, remembering what the business users were asking for, they wanted the contact information of the primary legal department assignee on the matter. So right now, we're including the contact information of the primary, the paralegal, and the administrator. So we're going to deselect paralegal and administrator and save primary. As we come down here, we also want to include closed records, just in case there is a contract that's active yet closed and that should be looked at. And here is where you'll be able to determine which contract status items will be in. So thinking back to matters, as you enter matters, they'll be in a certain status. And in our business scenario, we really only want to be notified of contracts that are still active, so they're not expired, they're active and they're reaching that renewal. So we'd only want to include contract active in our query to make sure that we're not getting updates on contracts that are perhaps expired and we're not needing to renegotiate that, or they're no longer needed. And then here's just a generic point of contact that will be included in the email for users if they have questions about the email itself. So now that we've gone over these, I'm going to jump back up to these paragraphs here. So remember we had some language before the contract and some language after the contract in that email. So you have the opportunity to configure your specific language and how you'd want to direct your users to utilize this email in an opening paragraph and a closing paragraph. Okay, so now that we've configured the module itself, let's go into the last matter we were just in and look at how to include the specific key date. So our last matter was the contract matter we just added, and we're going to navigate into the long-term reminder. In here, you will see all of the key dates on this particular matter and their information. Now, the way it's looking right now is that none of these dates are being examined with the long-term reminder notification system. If we want one of these dates to be examined, and in this case we would like the term end date to be looked at to make sure that if we're outside of the term or approaching the term, we'll get a notification. So what will be done is add that term date by clicking the toggle, and when it's green, it's saved and added to the notification system. Right now, it does not appear that we have any recipients lined up for this notification. So we're going to go look at the legal team. There are a couple ways to add legal team members, and I'll show you both ways. First, let's navigate over to our defined legal team members here. So let's look at Greg. If we click into Greg, what we'll see is we'll see a number of detailed information about his assignment to this matter, and we're going to select the toggle for contract reminder, and that way he'll get added to that reminder list. And so just to double check, we can go back to our long-term reminder and see that Greg is in fact added as an in-house legal staff recipient to that reminder. In the same way, let's look at our key personnel, because if you remember, our business case is really surrounding the key personnel and the business users submitting these contracts. So our key personnel, earlier when we added these, we didn't look at the access or messaging toggles. But now we're going to add them to have access and messaging. So messaging, this toggle is what adds them to that long-term reminder notification page. So if we look again back at our long-term notification, we'll see now that Calista is going to be receiving notifications of long-term reminders when this term end date within the next 120 days. So she'll receive those on a monthly basis for all of the contracts that she is assigned to in the system. So the second way to add people, I'm going to show you down here, is this add individual button. So with a corporate key person, so that's the business user, we can add them here. And notice that it gives you a list of all the key people in the system, so not just the ones that are assigned to the matter. And what happens is when you add that individual, so they're added here, I'm going to show you that they are also added as a key person here. And in the same way, if we add an additional in-house staff member that's not already a staff member on this matter, they're added here, and they're also added here as the legal team assignment. So let's take one last look at our long-term reminder and see that, yes, we do have it set up for term end date, and we have the appropriate people assigned. So this will fulfill our business use case that we defined earlier. And as a reminder, what we're looking at is we're examining the status of active. So let me just show you where that is too to make sure that it's clarified. So our primary information is status, so it's looking at contract active, only searching these types of matters. We're looking at key date, so that's term end date, where we define that within the long-term reminder on the matter itself. The repeat cycle we defined on the contract notification admin setting. We targeted our key personnel business users that are on the matter, and we made sure that the primary information from the in-house legal department user is going to be included on that contract or the notification. And there's another look at the type of email, an example email of what they could receive. So at this time, I want to go ahead and review some tips and tricks. A lot of times we're asked the question, so what is the difference between short-term and long-term reminders? So I put together this slide just to review the differences. So on short-term reminders, every person assigned on the matter will receive those reminder notifications when they're configured. So there's no picking and choosing individuals. It's everyone assigned will receive a reminder. And the short-term reminders are a little bit more ad hoc. They can be defined a little bit more, I guess, differently by matter and by date field, and it's not as well thought of a process as the long-term reminders. They're sent before a key date will occur. They're always before a specific event. And then you can add individuals to reminders that may not necessarily be assigned to the matter when they show up on the assignee list as a reminder role. In long-term reminders, as we did earlier, we picked and chose which people we wanted to be notified. So we didn't add all the in-house legal users or all the key personnel. We chose which ones specifically we needed to be reminded. And then with long-term reminders and the contract notification module, these typically tend to be well thought out business use case processes that the admin set up, so a little less ad hoc. and more purposeful in their configuration. And then notifications are sent some time amount before, so like we had the 60 days before, and then some time of amount after where we had the 120 days set up. So unlike short-term, which is always before, the long-term can look before and after. And then any individual receiving a notification from a key date will be assigned to the matter. So as we added those individuals to the notification, they also got added as an assignee to the matter. I have a few more tips and tricks for you guys, more of a review of what we've covered thus far. So key dates, like we looked at the contract type, matter type, key dates are configured by the matter type and our category. Workflow targets create an event after a specific event. And then workflow targets can be added automatically or manually, depending on the business use case. And then one that we haven't covered yet, but I wanted to point out, is that you can send reminders to yourself through the personal note feature. So as discussed, the reminders on the matter will get sent to all of the assignees on that matter. But if you wanted to create a note just for yourself for a specific date, you can go to the personal note item in Lawtrac on the matter, and then this note space will pop up, and you can add yourself a personal note with a message to yourself and a follow-up date. And then I'm going to show you where you can find those at a later time. So when you're in Lawtrac, you go to Messages and click My Notes. And here on My Notes, you'll have the note we just added. And you have the opportunity to also add another note if you wanted. Also with a follow-up date. So now that we've covered, in this webinar we covered key dates, short-term reminders, workflow targets. We also looked at the long-term reminders and the differences between long-term and short-term, and then a few tips and tricks. So at this time, we'll start answering questions. So if you have any more questions, please type those into the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll get to those questions. Okay, there is a question. It is, if you have non-opposing outside counsel with a valid email address, are they also part of the recipient list? And yes, those outside counsel will also be part of the recipient list for the reminder. We have another question about where all of the dates and workflows are presented. So there are a couple places. So if you want to look at all dates and workflows for this particular matter, you can select this Events button, and you'll be able to see all of the dates associated to this matter. As a user, if you want to see a scheduled event, you can go into the scheduled events here under time and see all dates and events and reminders as well here. Okay, I'll give everyone a few more questions to add, a few more minutes to add questions. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more coming in. If you guys have specific questions, please feel free to direct those to your CSA. And if you don't know who your CSA is, email csa@mitratech.com, and we'll make sure to put you in touch with your CSA. Other than that, thank you guys so much for attending, and hopefully you'll be able to use some of these tips and tricks today to improve your business processes and your workflow and your utilization of Lawtrac. Thanks again.